And welcome to episode 14 of the Brood Sages, Stormbound players with a head for the game. I am Freeloader, and with me as always are my co-hosts, Sabaiku and Arthas. Sabaiku, how's it going tonight?
Fantastic.
And Arthas, how are you doing?
Hello, I am doing great.
Well, we are the Brood Sages, and as a reminder, you can always contact us at Brood Sages on Twitter, or for all of you who used to binge watch the original Saved by the Bell, our email address is thebroodsages@gmail.com. So guys, this week we have some exciting stuff coming. First, let's talk about our recap. Anybody trying some new decks this week? Sabaiku, go first.
Yeah, I've been actually working my way through Platinum with Archdruid Aaron, the recently nerfed card. Now seeing some use in a non-winter faction, but it's been working out very well for me. I did manage to hit Diamond 5 with
Wait, which
the
faction are
deck.
you playing?
I am playing Swarm using Edric and Aaron to pull Dark Harvest and Needle Blast. So it's a nice mid-range Swarm deck that looks to get down to the baseline relatively early, but instead of a reckless attack on the base, you have to play a little more conservatively to try to set up the Dark Harvest swing turn on 7 mana. And it's been a challenge. I've been enjoying learning how to play this deck, cycling it differently, building it differently than I normally do, but I can definitely say the card is nerfed, but it can still definitely be viable in the right deck.
I mean, it was nerfed to only one card.
Yeah.
Well, Arthas, how's it going with you? What have you tried this month?
Well, I've also been joining Subaiku in the Swarm exploration because I've also been playing Swarm mid-range, and it's a bit different though. It's different from like typical like Satyr spam mid-range. It's actually dragons, bringing back the Spare and Dreadful Keepers combo, as well as Zuri. That card's amazing. It's so fun.
I'm glad you're saying that. It's the first legend I could actually get to level 4 right now, so there's hope, you're saying.
Right, so I am playing a dragon deck with Dark Harvest and Edric, and it's very challenging to play. But like after a lot of like learning and building the deck, it's actually doing really really well. And literally the only thing holding me back now against like the top metas is my level 4 green and saber, which I'm extremely tempted to fuse because both of them in total only require 58 fusion stones to bring up to max.
Do it.
I don't know.
You could get there.
No, but then my
Well-
fusion stones will only be 3 digits.
Oh, good lord.
Life is so hard.
You know,
Right.
it's funny that you say that because right now I could actually level up. I think I have enough fusion stones to level up like literally 4 cards to level 5 because I'm only missing 1 copy of like Lime Limbs and Hags and a couple of others. The problem is I don't have 4,000 gold.
Right. Yeah, and not yeah, it's also the gold, right? Because I don't know what kind of like discounts they're gonna be thinking of doing this Christmas. So I can wait a few weeks, I guess. Makes me sad though.
Try to catch a Christmas and New Year sale. I'm trying to do the same thing. Just
Yeah.
stockpile and hope that there's something coming up.
Not me, I'm poor. So I also have been trying a new deck this season. I haven't gotten away from Rush, but I am trying out. I had this idea in my head of an extraordinarily aggressive Ironclad deck that normally when I try to build very, very low mana cost decks, what I end up finding is I either get there right away or I can't get there. If my opponent manages to kind of turn the corner, all of my cards are just so weak that yeah, I can play all 4 of them in a turn, but like a max level Needle Blast or something just clears my board. And so I had this idea that, well, what if I take that extremely low mana curve deck, but I put in Unstable and Fort Tonic. So now any of the units that I vomit out can immediately turn into big boys. And it turns out it works. It works really well.
It's like just slapping an Aaron Gifted Away, so it works,
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't matter what's in my hand. Like literally there are times where I will play a unprocced linked Golems because the rest of it, because I don't have any other constructs, but it doesn't matter. I'm just going to stick it next to this unstable build and hit Fort Tonic and it'll be fine. And it turns out, yeah, it is fine. This is the first. This is the first deck where I've actually found that Fel Flares' body is not that big of a liability because it turns out even that gets big.
Man, you can go even more crazy and put something like Big Thrust in there.
Oh, I know. I've thought about it. I've thought about Big Thrust and possibly instead of the West Wind Sailors. But I don't know. Like I've always really liked Green Gale Serpents, and I've really wanted to try to fit in Spare Dragonling into this deck, and unfortunately,
Wait, why don't you put Embers in?
because that's cost too much.
Oh,
I don't want anything of 4 mana. Come on, this is 3 mana and under.
I like that your philosophy here is my rush deck isn't fast enough.
Exactly. But it's working exceedingly well. It turns out that unstable Fort Tonic is insane, and it's more than enough value to make your rush deck resistant to just about any AOE or board clear that your opponent could put out.
Not to mention, looking at Freeloader's deck, because he shared it with us, prior to recording, and his Fort Tonic and Unstable is only level 3, and all of his other cards are basically level 4. Wow, that's a lot of value. Then, if you can imagine if it's max, right? The freaking horrors in Diamond 1.
Oh, I know. In all honesty, unstable build doesn't need to be upgraded past probably level 2. I mean, level 3 is adequate. It doesn't need to be level 4. Fort Tonic, however, like I would love to have Tonic level 4 or 5 because that's where all the value comes from. You just want a 2 mana. Like if there was a 1 mana structure with a drawback, I'd be playing that instead. Because all I want is something that procs Fort Tonic. I don't really care what it is.
Right, and you're putting so many units on the board, your opponent isn't going to trade into the tower anyway.
Correct. Yeah, no, they're going to try to clear everything else. But it's great for things like witches. If I'm playing against Shadowfen, it's great for things like Hunter's Vengeance doesn't impact the
Yeah.
structure. So it's really great to have something that just sticks on board because now suddenly there's all these tiny units that have gotten big that they need to put real mana and value into to try to clear, and they don't have anything left over for the tower. So after that, the next thing that I want to bring up is it's time for our monthly meta report.
The BS meta report.
Exactly.
Yay!
We need to have some kind of like we roll in this like music and it's just us singing the BS meta report. Something like that.
Do that a couple more times, that'll be perfect.
I have not had enough to drink yet for me to think that that's a great idea, but I'm all for you giving it a shot. So the third BS meta report is out. And of course, for those of you who don't recall, the way we put this together is we send out a survey to some of the top tier players out there who play a lot. That's really what we're looking for, is people who are playing a lot to try to find out what's going on. The first set of questions we ask are about what are you seeing? What kinds of archetypes are you playing against? And the second survey that we send out is asking, based on your experience to date this month, what seems to be the strongest? Now, Arthas, what have we got this month in terms of frequency? What's getting played a lot?
Frequency, we're seeing a lot of Swarm Rush, like a lot. Same with the Ironclad mid-range. And me and Sabaika were talking, but we basically only see Ironclad and Swarm nowadays with just a little sprinkle of Winter and Shadowfen. And that's pretty surprising. I mean, Swarm Rush being back at it again,
We talked about this last month, and it's easy. You just ladder up with the cards that you already have leveled. You'll win, maybe not 100% of your games, but you'll win enough that you'll climb and you'll feel okay about it.
Yeah, disclaimer, when we say it's easy, we mean it's easy because it's already the deck you're familiar with, not that it's a brain dead deck.
Right, it's a familiar deck.
Yes, thank you for clarifying.
And I guess this makes sense because talking about Swarm Rush here, recent Void Surgers nerf, it opens a lot of doors for Swarm Rush now, right? I hardly see Void Surgers now, and when I do, man, it was a very rough time for me. Some guy cleared 8 of my units with Void Surgers.
No,
I was
that's
not
terrible.
expecting it. Okay.
I agree with you. I don't play around it at all anymore, and we're maybe getting a little bit ahead of ourselves in the discussion. But I agree with you. I don't play around it at all. I just say, you know what? Now at this point, if you're still running it, good for you. It's still a good card. It's still does a lot when you put it in your deck.
Yeah, but looking at the other frequencies, Shadowfen midrange, still there. It doesn't really die as an archetype. I mean, a lot of its synergies encourage the mid-range big boy buff kind of playstyle. But
Hello,
we're
Claxy.
still seeing, Klaxi. We're seeing still a lot of winter pack control. Surprisingly, ones who still use Aaron and Gift of the Wise, because it's not that it's bad, it's just not as extremely overpowered anymore. But there are still some spells, and this is what gets me the most. There's a still minimal number of players out there, but it's definitely significantly more than before. We are seeing a little more winter pack rush. It's actually catching me by surprise in the ladder.
Really? So what is a Winter Pack Rush deck looking like right now?
Oh, it's got a lot of really cheap units to flood the board, like things like Rivalings, Lawless Herd, Fell Flares, and it really like kind of screws in my head because I'm normally used to just seeing a lot of spells. But when they start like flooding the board, I get like so overwhelmed because I'm playing around a different kind of playstyle, and then they slap in like one or two hearts, and I'm like, wait, I'm in trouble.
Yeah, it's nice to see that people are experimenting with other winter decks now that Aaron and Gift of the Wise isn't so prevalent. And think to yourself, well, I have these winter cards. Let me see what else I can do with them.
Yeah, I think it's also telling that once the freeze buff happened, a lot of people were trying out a mid-range winter pack deck that was sort of focused around freeze and some decent value minions, right? Giovanna being kind of like the key to it, trying to get a really good swing turn out of her. But it's even when I tried it last month, it felt like it was suboptimal. And it appears, based on what we're seeing, that a lot of people experimenting with Winter Freeze have come to the same conclusion that an additional amount of value is needed. And so we're seeing more control cards being added into the Winter Freeze decks. And it's making it harder and harder for us to, our survey takers, to provide any sort of differentiation. They're all effectively just getting classified now as winter pack control decks because at the end of the day, that is the play style of both variants now. And not for nothing, but one deck that really does love to prey on winter pack control is Swarm Rush. So seeing Winter Pack Control sort of take over all of the Winter Pack mid-range players, and they're going to a more controlling style, that does nothing but make Reckless Rush players salivate, because that's the deck you want to roll into, right? Like that's the best matchup.
I thought it was mid-range that you want to run into as Rush, because Control is built to counter Rush.
In general, it is, but the
Oh, okay.
the freeze control has a weakness that it doesn't normally clear the units. It relies on freeze to hold for the turn, and Forgotten Souls is kind of like the one counter to that's like nope, freezing doesn't do anything. It just gives me something I can pog. Thanks. Uh, so that's kind of the Achilles heel of freeze is that like Swarm has a built-in counter to it, right? It's terrible for Shadowfen to see freeze, but Swarm doesn't mind so much.
Guess you have a
I,
point there.
yeah, at least that's been my experience. I'm more than happy to defer to people with like yourself with additional play experience than mine.
No,
But
I
for
agree.
me,
I agree.
It's also quite possible that the Swarm Rush players are, really trying to target the Ironclad mid-range, which we talked about as being also very prevalent here, and trying to get out ahead of these more value-oriented Ironclad decks, and that's a pretty reasonable way to target it.
That makes sense. Yeah.
so we'll table this for later, but I want to just sort of drop the little line here as a note for all of us and for our listeners. We will discuss this at some point based on the continued play rate, and we'll get to it in just a second about its power. Ironclad mid range seems to really be just kind of camping out at the top of the world. And specifically, what brought this to mind was the matchup into Swarm Rush. Swarm Rush, I feel, is really favored unless the Ironclad mid-range player gets to open with like green protos into linked golems going second. Linked golems seems to be such an early game linchpin in that deck. And I think maybe we should have a quick conversation tonight at some point about does Ironclad mid-range need to have maybe some of its gas taken out of it? Does Link Golems need to be looked at? And to that point, Subaiku, why don't you walk us through what our power rankings are this month in the meta report?
As you mentioned, Ironclad mid-range still on top of the power rankings, still in tier 1. It's unsurprising the deck hasn't been hit by any of the balance changes, but some of the decks that play into it, for example, Winter Pack Control, have been. There were definitely ways to try to build that Aaron Gift of the Wise deck that could at least try to target the Ironclad mid-range, play some Siren in there, maybe Crazy Bombers, try to get those board clears to regain control. But now it's a lot. It seems to be a lot harder to target from the control standpoint. We're seeing the power of the Winter Pack Control fall down to tier 2, and the Ironclad stays on top. Second in our power rankings, and also in tier 1, barely scraping in, is a Shadowfen mid-range, which I have to say I have not seen a ton of, and I'm very thankful for that because it's still very powerful. Claxty and Bragda and the Toad spam is all still a very good way to build up a big board. The Winter Pack Control, again, with the board clears, isn't really as much of a concern. So now you're trying to mostly go toe-to-toe against the Ironclad mid-range, which you can do from a value standpoint, and against Swarm Rush, which you can do from a control standpoint. So Shadowfen mid-range still definitely in a pretty reasonable position here.
It's really hard for Claxy, I would imagine, to generate any real value from your opponent in the Ironclad mid-range matchup, isn't it? Just trying to think, like, does Claxy ever, like, I'm sure Rain Claxy is still a thing, no doubt, but you never really get any opponent clears with it.
No, mostly what you're doing is trying to set up that turn ahead of time, because your opponent probably doesn't play a lot of board clears, so you'll get some of your tokens to stick, and then you get to clog up the board with a ton of value. They're going big in a geographically concentrated area, right? They have to do it around a tower or around a construct.
Right.
But if you're able to go back and forth in the early turns on the front line, which is certainly possible with Hunter's Vengeance, Witches, Crimson Sentry, Toxic Sacrifice. There's a lot of defensive tools in the Shadowfen kit that can work for you in that area. So if you can just stick some tokens to hold a front, now you have a disperse set of large minions around the board that's very hard for them to deal with and very hard for them to attack because you're probably also clogging up the area around your baseline.
All right. So, Arthas, I'm noticing that Winter Pack midrange is a solid tier 2 deck based on the survey we've sent out to top tier players, and yet its play rate is almost nil. In fact, nobody's really seen it. What do you think? What's going on?
I can kind of vouch for that too because even myself I stopped playing Winter Pack mid range. It feels like there are just so many better options, you know. I know I was hyping it up quite a bit a few episodes ago, and it is very fun still. It's just definitely feels like it's just lacking something. I don't know, value or setup. I don't know, but it's just not as good as playing even the nerfed Winter Pack Control with Aaron and spells. Like that one still seems to be incredibly powerful because I still see that decent amount. Like even after the Aaron nerf, where Aaron cannot cast Gift of the Wise now, people are still playing Aaron Gift of the Wise decks. I mean, they're still playing Aaron with Needle Blast and Blade Storm, still destroying me with like Hunter's Vengeance and stuff. And then like after playing Aaron, they play Gift of the Wise and Ulf. And then it's like, oh man, okay. But like with mid range, you know, it's not it's a bit harder, I guess. Because I've done like countless experimentations and different optimization routes for like Winter Pack mid range, like with Zavana, but it always seems to be lacking. Like eventually, when I was trying to optimize it even more and more, I just ended up putting things like Gift of the Wise in, and it's just like, okay, Gift of the Wise rhyme. Okay, I'm only winning because they don't have confinement. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, what is level 5 gift? Can you remind our listeners?
It is 8 mana. It gives 14. So it's plus 6 mana, right? That's kind of crazy, right? That's a free rhyme basically on top of your rhyme.
Goodness. Goodness. All right,
Yeah.
so that's what we have this month for our meta report. Guys, what are we thinking about linked golems? Like,
All right. I wanted to add to your Link Golems thing, because I recently I fused it to level 5 because I'm a scrub.
oh no.
I got so tired. I got so tired by level 4 against the other level 5 people. Okay, so I caved. It only cost like 20 fusion stones, so it's fine. But
It's
anyway,
forgivable. It's
yeah.
forgivable.
Anyway,
So
I,
so
I I
so
feel super dirty with it. It's gross.
it's
What the heck?
It's
filthy,
gross.
no doubt.
It's just
Yeah.
the strength to mana ratio is crazy at level 5. If you land it on another construct, which admittedly is a condition, it's not a particularly hard one for Ironclad to meet, but it is a drawback. But if you can land it, you're talking about 13 strength for 3 mana.
for
Like,
for 3 mana. Okay, for 3 mana, like assuming there's already construct on the board, or even if there's none, then you just spend 1 or 2 extra mana. But like for Link Golems, it just buffs 2 large units, two of them, man.
right.
You know,
And it has
in
movement.
right,
And it has
exactly.
movement.
What the heck? So 2 big units. Usually, for 2 big units, by big units, the way I define big units by myself, are cards with units with 7 or more strength. Larger than the 6 strength threshold that most cheap cards have. So big units such as like Link Golems level 5 becomes 8 strength, and then anything it buffs will like 99% of the time be like 8 strength or more, right? And
Yep.
on an average basis, it takes 4 different cards or 4 different actions to clear those 2 units, and then you just needed Link Golems and another card to pull that off. It's kind of
Right.
wild.
Well, yeah, but there's also something even better about it, right? So like if I compare it to boosting elixir costs a little more, does a little less. It also requires there be 2 units already on the board. It doesn't supply the second one. And because linked golems has movement, the biggest difference is I can't use, let's say I want to use my recruits as one of the two. It's in hand, right? I got 6 mana. I'm going to play recruits into boosting. My recruits have to survive the trade if I want to clear a unit before I get to play the boosting on it. Whereas with linked golems, they take the buff and then trade. So they'll get the buff and survive the trade, whereas a recruits into boosting won't, right? Like that's a pretty big difference.
Yeah. It's even more significant that a unit survives in a faction like Ironclad because Link Golems is a construct, and there's so many construct synergies. Having a Link Golem survive with 1 strength after play is a massive deal if there's like a upgrade point nearby or like
Or in
literally
hand with
anything.
Mia next turn, right?
Yeah.
Even if you just open with green prototypes into Link Golems on 4 mana, next turn, upgrade point in Mia on whatever survives. It's fine. It's enough. You've put a ton of strength on the board. You've put something that continually generates value in the structure that your opponent has to deal with, or else it's going to get out of hand.
Right.
I'm going to take a quick detour. I promise this won't be very long, but it's time for story time with Uncle Freeloader again.
Okay.
Sabaiku and I used to play this other game called Hearthstone. And in it, Hearthstone had accidentally, and by accidentally I mean completely with 100% purpose, even despite being warned against it, printed a card called Patches the Pirate. And Patches had a fantastic effect, which was if he's in your deck, not your hand, but your deck, and you play a pirate, he shoots out onto the board. And so it turned out that the expected win rate of someone who accidentally drew pirate in their opening hand, like mulliganed and it showed up, dropped precipitously. The win rate difference between having Patches come out of the deck for free early or have to get played from hand was astronomical. It was such a big difference just based on having the cards shuffled the right way that at some point Blizzard kind of threw up their arms and said, sorry, this was a bad idea, and they nerfed it. Linked Golems to me, bringing it back to Stormbound, on turn 1, going second, green protos into Linked Golems, feels like one of those, oh my god, the expected win rate of this game just went haywire. it's too early for that big of a swing, in my opinion. And I think that's what feels bad about it. Um, I have been beating players who run it by denying them. If I can't clear all the constructs, I deny them a trade with the linked golem. So in other words, I don't put anything close enough to a construct that linked golems could be played in a way that both buffed and traded. And it's turned out to be an effective strategy to beat linked golems. If you can't clear all the constructs, stay far enough away from them, or at least position your units in such a way so that, you know, linked golems will not trade left or right after buffing the surviving construct. And that makes me think that maybe the right thing to do here to stop this giant swing in expected win rates, and I don't know what the real numbers are, I'll totally admit that. Just this is my feeling, would be to take away the movement from linked golems. Arthas, what do you think?
Well, that is a significant nerf, but it's still a lot of value even without the movement, right? Like 13 strength, 3 mana, what the heck?
Yeah.
The one of the other things that I'm like a little concerned is it is a little too similar to boosting elixir. Like it's just straight up better than, right? I mean, I know it already is, but it has its differences. But if it doesn't move, then it just like even more makes boosting elixir obsolete, right?
Well, Sabeku, isn't boosting elixir just kind of a worse linked golems now?
Yeah.
Doesn't
I think
would
boosting elixir is already obsolete. But so I want to go back to what you said there, Freeloader, because I do agree with you that in general, there is counterplay around linked golems. Your opponent is opening on 3 mana. He puts out Destructobots. You know what's coming. You can set it up so that your units are not within trading distance, like you said, or I like to go the other way and put my units so that they're bordering the Destructobots so that the linked golem has to go behind it, and that limits the utility there a lot. You can play Shadowfen and play Witches or Crimson Sentry are both reasonable counters that mitigate a lot of the damage from the linked golems, but that's trying to close the barn door after the horse has left.
That's very fair.
But we talked earlier about how Swarm Rush is a popular deck, and one of the reasons might be because it targets the Ironclad. And I think this is one of the reasons why, because a Swarm Rush deck has the tools to go around the huge value generator that the opponent just put down. In general, a Swarm Rush deck isn't doing a heck of a lot of trading anyway. But with Shady Ghoul and Doppelbox and even Dreadfawns, if you're building it that expensive, you can just go around the huge minions that your opponent has put in the middle of the board. Yeah, it sucks when they get down to your baseline, but you're trying to close the game out before that point anyway. And that might be one of the reasons why you're seeing Swarm Rush still so frequently, is because it's one of the few decks that, without actually trying to trade into the units, can still effectively work around it.
So are you suggesting then that a nerf to linked golems might open up more design space within Swarm Rush and potentially the rest of the meta?
I'm saying that the unique movement mechanics to Swarm allow it to already combat the Link Golem problem, and actually taking away the movement makes it a little harder for the Swarm deck to operate, right? Like
Oh,
you're
interesting.
trying to
Okay.
go around and behind their units. That's harder when the unit hasn't moved.
So that would be an inadvertent buff for Ironclad to beat Swarm. Hmm.
I'd say that's a bit controversial. Probably want to talk about that to Reckless, but
Very
like
fair. See what he says.
I see the logic there, you know, because zero movement cards do have their unique utility that movement cards don't have, and that's because you can place them anywhere you want, right?
We see this with Swarm mid range, right? Like too many zero movement cards makes it so hard to play defense that the deck becomes very difficult to play well. And you try to make up for it with something like Dark Harvest, which takes advantage of the fact that the units don't move. But when I'm building a deck, I always add 1 or 2 units that don't move because they do have defensive utility, or sometimes offensive utility as a way to protect something that's important on your opponent's baseline. So yeah, I'm not saying that it's necessarily better for linked golems to have movement or not have movement. I'm just saying that there are pros and cons in either direction. You got to be wary of unintended consequences.
That's fair. So Arthas, you're concerned about boosting elixir being sort of
It's just
outshined. So hold on, let me ask you this then. Another possibility would be to take link golems and maybe burf it. And I know how much MKM loves that
oh,
that
it's
term.
gonna. Don't tell me it's gonna be 4 mana, dude.
I was wondering, why not go 5 mana and just make
Oh
debug loggers completely irrelevant?
Let's make it 5 mana, take away the movement, and reduce the buff a little bit too.
No. I don't want a war song commander. I'm saying, what if we gave it like +1 health to both sides, both itself, it'll buff itself by 1 extra at all levels, and the unit that it's played next to by same thing, 1 level at
All the
all.
way up to 5 mana, though.
But bring it all the way up to 5 mana. Like, would that be too crazy?
I think
Because
that's too crazy.
it's the early game swing. Linked golems, I will die on this hill. Linked golems, if the first time you manage to land it is on turn 5 or 6, it's irrelevant to the game.
That's a little bit of hyperbole, but I see what you're saying.
I would say
It's not moving. Like, all the other decisions you made prior to it, all the other decisions that have been made post it, have a normal impactful level on the win likelihood of the game in either direction. When it's played on turn, on the first turn of 4 mana or on 5 mana with Destructo Bots, it's insane that early. That's just too much value. It's too big of a swing. So how would you propose limiting the win percentage swing of that card
I have an idea.
Okay, I'm listening.
I mean, it's a very basic idea, but I think literally just reducing the ability on it. Because the biggest problem isn't the synergy or the buff; it's how much the buff is because of how huge the how big the constructs become after Link Golems happens. I mean, so if we think about it, like let's say both the extremes, level 1, level 5, Link Golems at level 1 has movement, and when you proc it, that's 5 strength worth that you just put on the board with the Link Golem body and the 2 ability per unit. And at level 5, it's 13. And that's absolutely mad for a 3 mana movement card. I think that if they brought it down, like at level 1, it was 1 ability, so then it would be 3 strength, 1 movement with a condition. That would make sense comparing it to something like Westwind. And then at level 5, when you bring it down, maybe even by 2, 2 ability, right? So, it would still be 9 strength with movement, and the Link Golems themselves would buff up to 6, which is it's like a Westwind, right? I think
Right.
that's a decent enough nerf to make it not so overwhelming, but still keeping the design and the way the card is meant to be played, still similar. Because sure, like when you buff, like let's say level 5, my proposal is at level 5 it would only buff 4. It still keeps the 3 strength body, but like the construct that you buff will most likely be a unit with 7 or more strength. So that's already something big the enemy has to deal with. But the Link Golems doesn't have to be that big as well. And I think that makes more sense. And it also makes more sense for how much mana and movement it has.
I'm sorry, I just want to ask a dumb question right here because it was something you said just popped this into my head. At level 5, what is Link Golem's buff to the other unit?
It's also 5.
It's also, so it's effectively level 4 POG?
No, it's level 3 POG, actually.
Level 3 POG. Okay. So at level 5, it is stronger than Westwind at level 5, right? It's a bigger unit for the same cost with the same movement with level 3 POG for free.
Yeah. Or even better if you think of a full Westwind, right?
Yeah.
And then
6,
so
right?
then
That's 6/1.
there's 2 strength from the Link Golems and the 5 strength from the other unit. That is basically max Westwind, max Potion of Growth together.
Oh my
Yep.
gosh.
It's 6 mana worth of stacks rolled into 3 mana.
That's just insane.
It
That's
is
just
insane.
And you guys were getting to the point that I came to, which is I think that the linked golems themselves having the buff that they have is not terrible. Yes, it'll win a trade against any other 3, but that's fine. Like winning a trade against any other 3 mana unit is fine because there is a condition attached to it. Maybe it shouldn't be stronger than Heliotroopers, which also has a condition, the drawback that it's poisoned. But you can try to split those hairs later. The biggest concern is the buff on the other construct that it's linked to, and just reducing that, making it asymmetrical even, would be a huge step in the right direction, because now instead of an 11 strength Destructobots that goes along with this overstated 3 mana minion, it would be something that's a little more reasonable and a little easier to handle. I don't think that you
Interesting.
need to necessarily remove the movement. I don't think that the linked golems necessarily need to be hit hard, but the original unit that's getting the buff probably is where I would try to target it if I weren't trying to rework the card completely.
Do you see a scenario where something like linked golems +1 to itself in terms of buff over what it does now? So at every level it buffs itself even more, but it does 0 buff to the other unit?
Well,
Same
then they're
condition
not
though?
exactly linked.
Well, they are, because the buff only happens when they're played next door.
I guess that would just be a concern of like the original design of the card, right? And
Sure.
its uniqueness that it buffs both. And it would be a little too similar to personal servers where it's buffing itself.
Yeah, and it would buff itself and not the original unit, as opposed to personal servers, which buffs the original unit
And
but
not
not
itself.
itself.
Right.
So it would be a nice contrast to the personal servers that way.
But I think it would be a wrong idea to completely remove the whole like uniqueness part of Link Golems.
I
You don't want
agree
to
with you,
completely kill that design.
but
At least play with the stats first, right?
making it asymmetrical, I think, is one way to go
Yeah.
about it.
All right, let's close up the meta report conversation now that we've talked about maybe one of the cards that's keeping Ironclad on top. Overall, what do you guys think? Is the meta maintaining diversity? Is it healthy? How are we doing? Sabaiku, you go first.
Oh, I hate to say it, but no, I'm not seeing a ton of diversity. I made my way up through platinum, playing more games than usual, but not a ton. So, admittedly, my sample size is small and reflective just of me, but I see really just so much ironclad mid range and so much swarm that it's probably, I would say, probably 80 to 90% of my games. And I don't know if that's true. I'm not keeping that kind of track of my games, but that's certainly how it feels to me. I would guess that 10 to 20% of my games are against Winter and Shadowfen combined. That lack of diversity does take away from the enjoyment of the game. It makes every match feel kind of a little similar.
Yeah. I
Arthas, how
mean,
about you?
me, yeah, I'm also only seeing two factions really, and that's Ironclad and Swarm. And I love to like make new decks, like what I was doing with like my Ironclad, not Ironclad, Swarm Dragons. But like because of how little diversity I'm finding, I end up just building my decks to try and counter those, but like intentionally do worse against other decks. But since those other decks aren't being played anyway, it's like, what's the harm to me? I don't think that's really healthy. It's not very fun. I like to build more well-rounded decks rather than really tailored decks, just because of how invariant the meta is. You know, you're just seeing the same stuff, playing the same people and the same kind of play styles. You know, especially if you start mirroring other people. It's like, oh, okay, then it's easier to get salty when you lose because they have higher levels than you and you guys ended up playing similar deck. It's kind of not very good for the experience.
Hence why you threw fusion stones into your linked golems,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That's exactly why.
I will say that I am shocked at how far down Winter Pack has gone in terms of its frequency. There was a lot of Winter Pack being played in November, and it's based on what we're seeing, the least played faction now, and almost all of it in Control, which, again, that is the faction for Control, so I guess that part's not overly surprising. But my experience has been almost exclusively Ironclad. I haven't played nearly as much as the two of you, but I have been seeing almost exclusively Ironclad opponents. So I'm
Yeah.
also in that same boat.
People on the Discord do definitely talk about the winter decks that they're trying. Anyone who says that it's completely dead is usually met with, no, this one's working well for me, and Diamond kind of response. So it's definitely still viable. It's just maybe not as strong as it used to be, and that's enough to put off some people.
Well, the one the one promising thing that I will say from all of this is that Sheepyard has been overall fairly strategic in a lot of their decision making so far. I feel like the individual tactics, like for example, did Basanu have the right stats? Maybe we could argue, no, it's a little too weak, it's not going to see play. But the overall strategies that they seem to be, the overarching ideas that they seem to be putting forward are the right ones. And they have said flat out that Gift of the Wise is making the design space for Winter Pack difficult. They've nerfed it. They've now nerfed Erin, so she can't play it. It seems to me like they're trying to be able to make space where they could be introducing either changes to existing cards or new cards within Winter Pack that might be very powerful. And in a world where you can cheese out Gift of the Wise too powerful, but now that these changes are being made, hopefully we see the second half of this strategy, which is get Gift of the Wise to the point where it doesn't decide games on its own, and then start giving Winter Pack some really cool new stuff. And I'm looking forward to part 2.
I agree. Really, it's very clear from the moves that they've made so far that this is all prologue. They're just trying to get things in a good place for them to introduce larger updates and hopefully a lot more cards. And I'm very, very excited to see where they go from here.
All right, so moving forward from there, we solicited some feedback from our listeners everywhere we could. We asked for any and all questions that people have that they would like to see answered. And we got some responses. First up, we got a question from, I think this is pronounced Evil Deck. I'm not 100% sure, but I hope so. Arthas, I'll ask you this question. Are after attacking abilities any good against after taking damage abilities? So in other words, are like things like Lich Summoners, are they any good against Elders?
Well, if we're talking about the mechanic comparison, taking damage is like basically better because it encompasses all the situations after attacking would succeed in, while adding more situations where it could still proc the ability, but after attacking does not,
Exactly. It still works on your opponent's turn. That's a
You
big
also
deal.
can abuse one of the two, right? You can't force your own. I mean, I guess if you're playing with Forgotten Souls, you could play a unit with movement that attacks once, and then you could play Forgotten Souls to abuse that same ability one more time. But it's just a heck of a lot easier to abuse the taking damage ability of Elders, right? Especially in Shadowfen, but just in general, like Hunter's Vengeance is a great way of abusing taking damage effects. So there's just one of the two you can leverage a lot more, I think, right?
And some after attacking abilities are so strong that they still see a ton of play. Like I'm thinking Green Gale Serpents for Ironclad decks, right? Like on attack.
It's actually before attacking.
That's
Right.
right.
But for the most part, like Lich Summoners doesn't see a lot of play, and it's for a good reason. It's because it's only situationally useful. And
Well, a good after attacking card is like Toad. Toad is still seeing a lot of play.
It
It's still
is,
very
yeah,
strong.
it is fantastic for sure. The buff on it's really good.
yeah, it's got to be a really strong after attacking card or before attacking card. Good point.
All right, so follow up to that, Sabaiku, are liches and lasting remains and debug loggers, fluffy bad boxers, and other cards with this after attacking ability, are they losing play because of the elders being so good?
Well, having not been in the game pre-elders, it's hard for me to make that comparison. I think, to what we just talked about, it's got to be a really strong ability on attack in order for it to see play, as opposed to on taking damage. Actually, I'm struggling to think of a mediocre on taking damage ability that sees play. Like
Oh, that sees play. I don't. I don't think there's a mediocre one.
yeah,
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
exactly. It's basically what the answer actually boils down to is only the busted cards are the ones that see regular play anyway.
Right. I don't think it's a question about like the mechanic, right? Because the mechanic can be justified by the ability itself. It's just that most of the after attacking abilities just aren't as good as the other after taking damage abilities. Even if both of them were like the same mechanic, right? Like chestnuts or booming professors. Those abilities are just way too powerful. Even if those elders were after attacking, those would still see more play than the already existing after attacking abilities.
Yeah,
Well,
Because
that's
that's
true.
fair. Isn't it
yeah,
Vindicators I don't want to get my, or is it obliterators? I can never remember
No,
which word it is.
Vindicators, you're right.
It is
Yeah,
vindicators.
when they attack, they deal damage to the base.
Yeah, because there's like Greenwood Ancients, for example. So that uses the Elder mechanic, but it doesn't see play because its actual effect is just inconsequential, like nowhere near
Yeah.
powerful enough.
I would say it would have to do with the effect and whether it's worth it for the card stats, you know?
Yep.
Yep, agreed.
Okay, so back to Arthas with this one. Kep asks, which of the mods in Stormbound Discord server is the best? Your choices are A,
Kurua.
Kep, B, Kep, C, all of the above.
Okay, I guess it would be hard for me not to say Kep because I've been playing Kep a lot lately. Kep, aka Dreadful Keepers in the game. I think all of the Stormbound mods actually have a particular card after them. All of them being dragons. But Kep is Dreadful Keepers. Been playing a lot. Kep's very fun, very cool mod. But I gotta say it's Kurua.
All right, so Becca, do you want to stick your foot into this pool and announce who you think is the best or no?
I just want to watch Arthas get
No,
banned from the server.
no salt, please.
I want to go on record and just say that I love all of the mods and everything they do for the Stormbound
Oh yeah, for
community.
sure.
Very
Okay,
diplomatic.
thank you. Get Nanade. Can you whip as well, or do you have to just get Nanade? That's unclear. Asks a couple of questions here. One, we'll go to Sabekio on this. What is the lore of Stormbound? Even a loose trail would be good.
So I will say that there's not a ton of lore in the game. You see a little bit of flavor around a lot of the heroes on the loading screens. But if you go to stormbound-kitty.com, you will see a lot of player-generated stories. And I believe there's also some on the Discord. There's a lot of fans with a lot of imagination that have worked to fill in those gaps. And Freeloader has even read some of those to you for your bedtime if you care to listen.
Shameless plug. You can go back into our podcast history and see it. Arthas, do you have any comments on the Stormbound lore? Do you know anything that us noobs don't?
I know Stormbound's gravity is exceptionally strong because I calculated its acceleration.
Oh, do tell.
I did actually. Here, let me pull it up real quick. Me and Troxy's calculated the Stormbound acceleration due to gravity in the maths channel, and
Really?
it's actually accurate.
This is not the direction I expected this answer to go. I have to say I am very surprised.
Hey look, it's also published on Stormbound Kitty, okay? It's 843 meters per second squared. Wow.
That
Okay.
explains the toughness of all of these units.
we calculated this by well, okay, I don't want to get into it. I mean, it's a lot, but you guys can totally check it out on Stormbound Kitty. That's there also on the server, the Discord. I mean, but
I have to
it's
say,
very
the
funny.
next time I've got a cup of coffee and an hour to kill, I'm gonna sit down with a pad and pencil and work this through myself. Moving on from there, let's start with Arthas. What's your favorite unit?
Oh, favorite unit. That's a tough one. Okay. I have more of a top three. I can't really choose. Depends on my mood, you know.
You have to choose your favorite child.
I
Here it
have to
is.
choose. Oh
Every
no.
parent has a favorite child. If you didn't know that, it wasn't you, it was the other one.
Oh man. Okay, it's gotta be Brood Sages. No,
Nice.
okay, you know what? I actually
Oh,
didn't even think about
you
this.
had the
No,
chance.
listen. Look. I have my backings. Okay, I loved Brood Sages even before we existed. Okay, like it was set in my destiny, right? Okay, listen. Brood Sages has an incredibly high skill cap. All the little utilities you can do with the spawns and how you can optimize where you want to put the stuff. I find that whenever I play Brood Sages, I find that those games to be one of the most interesting games ever because of the things I can do with it.
Okay.
It's either that or like either Edric or Toad, but they're like not as cool, you know.
Not as cool. I agree. Brute Ages are a lot of fun to play with.
You're darn right they are.
For my answer, I'm going to go with Claxy.
Ooh.
The first legend that I ever saw in the game, I was like, oh my gosh, that effect is so cool. I have to craft that card immediately. And I did. And I don't play it anymore, but I regret nothing. It was still so fun to play.
I am probably going to go. I'm probably going to go with witches, and the reason why I'm going to go with witches is because I don't think there are too many other common cards in the game that let somebody at a low level punch up as well as witches do. If you can get your witches to at least level 3, my dear platinum or gold or silver listeners, if you can get your witches to level 3, you have a real puncher's chance with a good Shadowfen deck, pardon me, to really be able to punch up and make, sort of reach new heights at the end of your season. It's one of the first cards I got to level 5. It's one of the few cards I have at level 5 still, and I regret nothing on it. It's just the MVP in my deck in so many games. So there's my answer. We will go, let's see, we'll go back to Arthas on this one. Are we ever going to get, do you think, a feline knight or pirate elder? And I'm trying to think right now. I know there's no pirate elder. Is there no knight elder as well? I guess there isn't, is there?
There is none.
So do you think we're ever going to get an elder for felines, knights, or pirates?
I think it would be crazy if we didn't. So I think that is something that Shipyard maybe are thinking of filling, because those are some open spots in the neutral kingdom, much like how they filled the pirate hero, right?
Right, that's right.
Looking forward to seeing what ideas they come up with.
So Sabaiko, you are in agreement with Arthas then that you think there's going to be?
I think there should be. That's what I'll say.
It should be, yeah. Should be as
All
well.
right, I'm going to take the contrarian on this. I'm going to say, look, elders were a thing. They had effectively their expansion. They got introduced to the game. There's elder packs. That's not the same as heroes. Heroes have been in the game since the beginning. Every faction or every race, pardon me, within the factions and stuff get one. Seeing Shipyard come in and give us a pirate hero is different, I think. I feel like the elders are the elders. That expansion's done. So I would not be surprised if we never get a feline knight or pirate elder.
I agree with you. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't get it, but they should do it because I like symmetry. I like completeness.
If these cards don't show up, if anything, maybe ancient versions of them would show up.
Okay.
But I don't know. That's even more of a stretch, though.
And the last question from Get Nade is, who exiled King Loras and why?
Well, okay, I know the answer to this one. This is 100% irrefutable, okay? Anyone has ever watched Disney, there's this particular lion, someone called Scar. Yeah, he excelled this lion club, right? He also happened to be the king. I wonder, king, lion, exiled. It's gotta be Simba, guys. Scar has to have been the one that done
it.
Incontrovertible proof that Stormbound is actually part of the Disney universe.
There it is. We've got it, folks. The next race that we're going to be introducing are warthogs.
Don't toy with me.
I was actually going to say Edric did it because King Loras kept making spots all over the carpet. Maybe that's just the cat owner in me and frustrations that I have with my current cat. Yeah, I don't know. I would say go to stormbound-kitty.com, best website on the web, and see if you can't find in the user stories something about King Loras, and there may be some interesting little tidbits there that we are unaware of yet.
And if there isn't, feel free to write your own.
Yeah, exactly. It would be a very interesting story to tell. So moving on from there, guys, that's the entirety of the mailbag that we've received. There is one last little piece of news that I really am quite excited about. There is a new kind of tournament that was just announced. Shipyard promoted it. It's being run by Pixels and Vox. Arthas, give us the lowdown.
So this is what we call the Conquest Tournament, and if you guys haven't already seen, it was announced in Shipyard's Twitter, right? And social media, other social media too. Also announced on the official Stormbound Discord with a link to the social media. And this is the sponsored Conquest Tournament run by the community, Pixels and Bucks. And this one's very interesting because the way it's done is that people are going to be playing with equal levels. Equal levels being every card is level 1. All base HP is 10 HP. So it's kind of like fully level 1 account. That's done through friendly matches. But what's cool is that players will be fighting in a best of 3 against opponents. And before the best of 3 happens, you're actually choosing 3 factions that you're going to be playing with. And same with your opponent. Your opponent will also be choosing 3 factions. And in the first game, either of you can choose any of the factions that you have picked. You play each other, and after that game, the winner of that first game cannot use the faction that they had just played. They have to switch to one of the other two. The loser can do what they want until they win or don't. And I think this is incredibly fun because there's a lot of things you can do. You don't have to submit decks like in most traditional tournaments. You can switch cards back and forth in any of your factions during the best of 3. So this is a very flexible, really different kind of dynamic for tournaments, and I think it's very, very fun. And I gotta say, as someone who loves to join tournaments and community events, there really is nothing to lose when you join. There's just so much to learn, and who knows, you might surprise yourself, right?
Well, that certainly sounds like an exciting event. I know that a couple of my friends have already said that they plan on giving it a shot, even potentially Subaiku, which I'm excited to see how well he does. But that's going to end the main portion of this episode. So it's time for me to remind you all to please follow us on Twitter at BroodSages and email us at thebroodsages.com. For Arthas, Subaiku, I am Freeloader. We are the Brood Sages, reminding you to stay hydrated.
BS Meta Report! BS Meta Report! BS Meta Report!